I'm Diego Cortez.
Adam Schoenfeld.
Welcome to The Scoop, brought to you by Full Tilt Poker. And today we have a genuine legend in the history of poker.
I thought we had a hotshot kid.
He was a hotshot kid when we were
but that was 30 years ago.
Kids, but he was about 25 or 30 years ago. But Tom McEvoy really revolutionized poker in the sense that he was kind of the first Chris Moneymaker, a relative unknown, kind of a smaller stakes guy who won the main event.
This is when it was a very, very closed fraternity, and he broke in.
And that really made people realize the dream that they could win it too, and that they should try to get in through a satellite and try to win it. And he won 3 other World Series bracelets, and has written a number of books. I think people who started playing when we did certainly recognize his name. He's one of the most recognizable players. But this generation may either not even know about Tom or may not fully appreciate how he's contributed to poker. So it's going to be fun, and we've got Tom McEvoy with us. One thing I think people don't realize now with tournament poker so big is that you pioneered the idea of tournament poker being a livelihood in itself.
A profession.
I mean, poker's a profession, but it was live games, and the tournaments were just an excuse to gather some big money guys. But I think you were the first guy who decided, I'll play tournaments all day long, even though there were live tournaments that involved a lot more running around, and I'll try and make a living just based on tournaments. Is that accurate?
That is actually very accurate. Before I'd even moved to Las Vegas, the very first time I played a tournament, I was playing some cash games at the Golden Nugget, and they had a tournament, and you didn't even have tournament chips. You played with casino chips, and you kept what was in front of you and played down to 10% of the players. And I remember that there was like 34 players playing like a $110 tournament, and I finished second. So I got hooked for life way back then. That was 1978. I still remember it.
It's going to be the best or worst thing that ever happened to you.
Yeah, you can debate it either way. And after that, I really got hooked on tournament poker, and I developed my own skills, and eventually wrote books and so forth. Mm-hmm. Of course, now the game's evolved so much; it's a different era, But back then, I was definitely what you'd call a tournament specialist, one of the few that would concentrate on the tournaments, and there were a lot fewer to choose from. I remember playing like $30 and $40 tournaments with Johnny Chan in the early 80s before anyone ever heard of him.
Right.
And that's how I cut my teeth, playing these guys.
When you started doing this, it's easy now to forget that people in the real world, they had never even heard of poker tournaments. When you were doing this for a living, would you have to explain to people in your real life, well, you play for chips and then you have a prize, like it was unheard of.
It was like, well, what do you really do? I mean, I said, well, that's what I do. And I said, wait a minute, the idea of being a professional poker player, especially a tournament poker player, was just almost incomprehensible to people.
One thing that I think is right also is that people didn't even understand how tournaments differ from live play. And obviously now there still is a big difference, but people appreciate it, and maybe they're closing that gap. But when you started playing tournaments, there was no sophistication at all about the fact that this called for different strategies or tactics or understanding of the prize money or whatever. Is it fair to say you just kind of developed these on your own, or were there any sources of information or other players who were thinking along the same lines, or were people just sitting down thinking, all right, I'll just play poker and see what happens?
And after I won the World Series of Poker, I was asked to write a tournament book. And back then, this was 1985, don't forget, nothing had ever been written on tournament poker. I wrote the very first book.
Literally nothing.
Literally nothing. People just didn't quite understand. Tournaments, they played them like they were in cash games, and of course we know that there's huge differences in what you have to do. And so I wrote the very first book. Mike Carroll kind of reviewed it, and he was a lot more mathematically oriented than me, but he says it was amazing to him that without a good mathematical background comparable to his, that I was as on target as I was. It was mostly just kind of my own strategies that I developed by playing. You know, the SOP method. You know, seat of your pants.
Did Bill Brunson's talked a lot of times about how Super System changed his whole life in terms of other players now understanding what he was doing and using the same tactics against them. Being the only book out there and all the notoriety about you being the first satellite winner who won the main event, did this book now have a big impact on just your own experience of other people now playing a certain way or using certain tactics?
Oh, sure. To this very day, you know, once you win the World Series and have any kind of notoriety, even if you don't win the World Series main event, but you've won other things, you know, you automatically got a target, you know, on your forehead. You know, people want to knock off any well-known player, especially if you won a World Series event. Now, of course, I make jokes, well, I won it last century, you know, which is technically
right, of course.
Accurate.
Like,
Yeah.
It's been almost 26 years now. But I'm used to that, and I try to compensate for it and work my own strategies and to understand that they're coming after me. Also, because I have somewhat of a tight table image, I pull more moves than people think I do, capitalize on it, because they just can't afford to call me.
Right.
Yeah, 'cause might be the one time I'm bluffing.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
Tom, you talk about it being almost 26 years ago. Talk a little bit about the atmosphere at the World Series of Poker in 1983, because I've seen pictures, Diego's seen pictures, and we've talked about the picture of you winning.
And videos.
Yeah. At the time, your then wife was sitting almost right next to you at the table. Just describe to us a little bit of the atmosphere. Contrast that to what goes on now.
She was sitting next to me at the table. That
and
was
Rod Pete's wife too, right? Who was your opponent?
Actually, it was his girlfriend.
Yeah.
And here's what happened. This had never happened before, that the wives or girlfriends were allowed to even sit at the table. When we got heads up, Rod Pete asked permission for his girlfriend to sit next to him. And they asked me, I said, I don't have any problem with that. I'd like to have my wife sit next to me.
Right.
You know, so it was kind of a fair trade. So that's kind of what happened. And after that, for some reason, they never allowed it again. I'm not sure why.
See, I thought that was just kind of the standard for that period.
Yeah,
So it was really a 1 year special program.
A 1 year special dispensation. But back then, don't forget the World Series started in 1970. So 1983 was already kind of getting fairly well established, but it was compared to now, it was still like night and day.
Right.
You know, so it was still kind of mostly a good old boys convention with a lot of Texans dominating a lot of the action, and of course Stu Unger had just won the World Series in '80 and '81. Strauss had won in '82, so Baldwin had won in '78. So still mostly Southern guys and Stu Unger at that point. And it was kind of like this: if you sat at a table, there might be one or at most two people you didn't know.
Right.
Now it's the other way around, where I sit at the table, I might recognize one face.
You can go the whole main event without playing someone you know right now.
Oh yeah, I've done it.
Yeah.
Where I didn't know anybody at the table. So it was kind of a good old boys convention back then, where you kind of knew everybody and were somewhat familiar with their style. Now in 1983, I was still kind of an outsider as far as a player. I kind of snuck up on him.
Right.
You know, that's kind of what's happened in the last few years with the main event winners. They were kind of unknowns, which I was at that time.
Right.
Kind of snuck up on them. And
I mean, the guys you mentioned, whether they were from Texas or New York, I mean, they were like the high stakes guys who played big money, and you were more of a grinding pro.
I would exactly what I was. I was mainly a 10-20 player, some 15-30 stud, and I played a lot at the Golden Nugget across the street. And of course, Binion's back then didn't even have a poker room except during the World Series, so you couldn't even play there. And satellites this was not the first year, '83, that they had satellites, but it was They were still in their infancy. It was just still kind of a new concept.
Right.
And the satellite you won, Tom, was not at Binion's, right?
No, it was.
Oh, it was? Okay.
Rod Pete.
He went at the
Oh,
Bingo
Rod
Palace.
Pete came
Rod
from Bingo
Pete
Palace. Okay.
won a satellite that had exactly 100 players in it, and it was at the old Bingo Palace, which is now the Palace Station.
Oh, okay.
They did like 4 of those. And I played
Right.
some of them. I didn't win. I remember what they did. They charged $110. They took $10 juice.
Right.
And there was exactly one winner.
Right. No, exactly.
One.
I mean, you'd won a one-table satellite,
Yeah.
but he was like a Chris Moneymaker, where he had to be,
Yeah.
Wow.
you know, 100
Yeah.
people.
And he did. And then it was really funny because there were so many unusual things at that tournament, not just for me personally, but the whole tournament. Rod and I had been playing quite a bit in the same games, so I was quite familiar with Rod Pete, you know,
Right.
and I was at least, I guess you'd call casual friends with him. You know, and we'd hung out a little bit together in groups, you know, and so.
But you knew his game, most importantly.
Yeah, sure. I knew his game. He knew mine, and he wasn't a stranger to me. And he didn't have a whole lot of money, nor did I at this point. Although I had just won, I had more than he did because I had just won the limit hold'em.
Right,
tournament.
$1,000 limit hold'em
Yeah.
a few days before.
Yeah, the previous week. So I was in a little better shape than he was.
Yeah.
But he was so short of money. He went around and, for example, he sold Johnny Chan at a discount.
Mhm.
You know, a piece of his action at a discount.
In the middle of the tournament, or before
No,
the tournament?
before.
Oh, after he'd won the seat.
Yeah, after he
Right.
won the seat.
So below par.
Right.
Yeah, for below par. Yeah.
That'll
so-
get you kicked out of the professional poker player union these days if you sold below par.
This is what I heard it was. And, you know, you'd have to double check with him, but I heard he sold 20% of himself for $1,000.
Right. At a 2-to-1 discount.
Yeah. And he did something even worse, I think. He had some of his buddies who also were kind of like on the rail, shall we say. He sold them pieces on credit.
Oh.
Without even getting the money. Now,
That, you know what? I'm getting an ulcer just thinking about that now. It's almost.
You're one big score.
Right.
So Tom McEvoy has a lot to tell us about, and a lot of reminiscences about the evolution of poker, so we're going to bring him back. He's earned the 2nd episode.
Old school.
we have a lot of episodes with these younger guys. Now we're giving equal time to the old school, so we'll be back with him for part 2.
2 bracelets. Awesome.
Well, you know, these aren't easy to win. I remember this one like it was yesterday. My opponent had me down to my left. Sorry. Anyway, it's down to my last few chips. So, I had to call. We play at fulltailpoker.com.